In this video, we're going to rebuild a large Roper ROC pump. This applies to the ROC 07 and ROC 12. These are the parts that we'll reuse from the disassembly we showed you in video 3. And the tools required for reassembly are the same as what were used for disassembly. The rebuild kit will come with all the parts you need to reassemble the pump. But hang on to the keys. Those are not always included in the kit. You'll find bearings, shaft, gears, and all the soft goods you need to put the pump back together. The first step is to assemble the drive shaft. Your kit comes with a new shaft and then a gear that must be mounted on the shaft. There are some spring clips that reside in slots in the shaft to help locate the gear in the proper position. To install the gear retaining rings, you'll slide one of them over the end of the shaft. And notice we're working on the end of the shaft that has 2 grooves in it. Those 2 grooves hold the retaining rings for the gear, and you'll have to slide it past the first slot, over the gear keyway, and into the second slot. Then you'll install the key for the pump gear. Be sure to insert it so it's flat and parallel to the shaft. Then we'll slide the gear over the shaft, aligning the keyway and seating it against the first retaining ring. Next, you'll install the outer retaining ring the same way you put the first one on, and it will keep the gear in the proper position on the shaft. Before reassembling, be sure that all your parts are completely clean and free of defects. We're going to install the bearings first. It's important to note that there are 2 ways the bearings can be oriented for installation. The grooves in the bearings can either be towards each other or opposed from each other. When they are towards each other, they're designed for low viscosity fluids. When the grooves are opposite each other, it's for high viscosity applications. The grooves in the bearings will face the gear, and after getting them put into one side, you can install the drive gear and the idler gear and make sure the shafts fit through the bearings nicely. And then you can install the bearings again with the grooves towards the gear on the opposite side. Be sure the groove that holds the O-ring is clean. Then you'll install the new O-ring into the groove that serves as the gasket between the end plate and the pump casing. Also be sure this slot is clear so fluid can lubricate the ends of the shafts. Use 4 of the short bolts that were removed in the previous video to reattach the faceplate onto the case and tighten it in a crisscross pattern using the hex wrench. It's easier to install the backplate if you stand the pump on its end. And again, be sure all the surfaces are clean. The backplate has a hole through it that feeds through to the slot to lubricate the bearings. Also be sure the O-ring groove is clean and install the new O-ring so the backplate seals against the case. There's pins that help locate the plate, and you'll see it fits only one way onto the case. You'll use 2 of the shorter bolts in the recess grooves, and you have to get those tightened down first. Otherwise, the seal housing covers them and you won't be able to tighten them later. The longer bolts go through the non-recess housings and again, tighten them down in a crisscross pattern before moving on to the next step. Next, the snap ring will be installed using your snap ring pliers. Open the ring up, slide it over the shaft, and let it seat firmly into the snap ring groove on the pump shaft. Listen for the click. Next, we'll install the mechanical seal. Remove the staples that keep the spring compressed prior to installing. Slide it over the shaft and let it seat down against the snap ring. That locates the mechanical seal in the proper position, and then use the small hex key to tighten it onto the shaft. Be sure to tighten all of the set screws. The next piece to install will be the seal housing. The seal housing has a groove on the seal side and the case side. You'll notice the O-rings that fit in these grooves are slightly different. Be sure to match the proper size O-ring into the corresponding groove. This is the side that goes up against the seal, and the O-ring that sits completely in the groove goes against the pump case. So, the smaller O-ring is on the seal side, and the slightly larger one is on the case side. Slide the seal housing down into position, and you'll notice there's some small pins that locate it. Next, we'll install the stationary seal. Be sure it's clean, and don't put anything on this portion of the seal. Slide it over the shaft, down through the O-ring, and check to see that there's spring compression from the mechanical seal. Then you can add the retaining plate and the lock nuts. You'll tighten these nuts in a crisscross fashion evenly, and then pull the stationary seal all the way down tight against the body. Finally, we'll reinstall the key into the pump shaft. Do this using pliers or a vise to squeeze the key into place. Do not use a hammer, or you could risk damaging the seal. Be sure the shaft turns freely, and then we suggest you pressure testing the pump by purging the air out of the body, filling the pump with liquid, and making sure nothing leaks prior to reinstallation.